विचार राष्ट्रीय एवं सामाजिक चेतना को समर्पित टीवी चैनल का प्रकल्प है। विचार का उद्देश्य एक धर्म, एक संस्कृति, एक सभ्यता, एक खान पान, एक आचार विचार, एक पूजा पद्धति, एक पहचान को स्थापित करना है।
Every living being is in pursuit of happiness. All people, all living beings wish to find happiness. But mankind also seeks to rise a little above happiness and find a transcendent bliss. To the extent that we go deeper than the realm of the sense organs and their satisfaction, to that extent we move gradually towards that bliss. When you are trying to understand, when you ask deeper questions about life and exercise your intellect to understand those questions, then you are experiencing a bliss from human intelligence or sapience. Whereas the happiness from the sense organs is related to the transient objects of the world, such as the satisfaction of taste via the tongue and taste buds when you eat something, or the happiness of hearing music via the ears, and so on. With one's intellectual seeking, one goes beyond this sensory satisfaction and moves from happiness towards bliss. When you extend compassion towards other living entities, sharing and receiving love, then the bliss you get from that is not from the senses, but at the level of the mind. Happiness to other living things and enjoying the particular kind of happiness it brings oneself is also from beyond the sensory level. The sense organs play a very small part in it. The Supreme Being is the foundation and the reservoir of this bliss, whereas the material sense objects of this world do not possess transcendent bliss, but rather some sort of gratification and transient happiness. The soul can experience sense gratification by contact with material objects, and it can experience bliss only by contact with the super soul. So the question arises, in order to obtain the transcendent bliss of God and be free of sorrow, is it necessary to renounce the worldly gratification of the senses? If one tries to leave the sense objects and turn towards spiritual bliss, one will find that effort is fruitless. Instead, if we absorb a little via practice, gradually, little by little drawing closer to God with a little worship as part of our daily life, then we find that bliss of nearness begins to increase, and our interest and attraction for material sense gratification begins to decrease. Just like if you eat something salty and then drink tea, the tea appears sweet to the taste. But if you eat candy and then drink tea, it appears bland. Similarly, when you taste a little bit of the greater bliss and gain some experience with it, then the satisfactions of this world automatically begin to appear bland. After all, God Himself has created the world. He created delicious fruits, for example. And He also created the taste and the sense organ of the tongue and taste buds to perceive that taste. So the object, the perceptics associated with the object, and the sense organ to experience the perceptics have all been created by God. Now, what does God want? That we don't taste the happiness of these sense objects? It would be strange to argue that God Himself created the material world, its sensory pleasures, put the ability to experience those pleasures in us, and then expects us not to partake of those pleasures. The Supreme Lord expects us to partake of the sense pleasures of this world, but not to do so unjustly. If we obtain these pleasures by causing pain to other living beings, then we will not be able to progress towards godly bliss. Similarly, if we indulge in these pleasures to such an extent that we drown our consciousness in them, then we will lose even the awareness that there is a bliss transcendental to this sense pleasure. So, the right way would be to partake of sense pleasure in moderation, to do so without causing undue pain to other living beings, and to give thanks to nature and the Lord for this pleasure in our daily lives, and simultaneously to also adopt a regular spiritual practice or sadhana to expand our consciousness of a higher bliss. The great master of yoga called Patanjali has taught methods to gain freedom. Breaking out of the cycle of birth and death is called freedom, because so long as you assume material bodies in order to partake of worldly sense pleasures, pay attention that while you will continue to obtain some pleasure, you will also continue to incur some pain or sorrow. Because along with the sense pleasures associated with sense objects, pain is also inevitably involved in them. Therefore, do partake of sense pleasures with caution, but also adopt some spiritual practice to go along with it. For man is the only species who can progress towards godly bliss while also being in contact with worldly pleasure. Let's say you have no specific desire to gain spiritual freedom in this life. No problem. But at least you do desire to experience bliss. So start with a little spiritual practice to experience bliss, and gradually, life after life, as a continuous stream, one will progress towards the desire for complete spiritual liberation. The teachings of Ashtanga Yoga, or the 8 steps of yoga, of the great sage Patanjali, show us how to have personal experience of godly bliss and gain liberation. Yet, people often become discouraged when they begin to try to learn from this tradition. They think, how can I be disciplined? How will I cultivate self-control? How will I execute this 8-fold process? Perhaps it is only for renunciates or monks. Perhaps in future I might relinquish material life and then dedicate myself to this practice. Let me tell you, this is not the case, and these worries are unfounded. Those who have an intense desire to gain spiritual liberation in this life itself, okay, let them dedicate all their time and life to these practices. It is their wish and their independent right. But for the rest of us, while being involved in secular pursuits, it is definitely possible to cultivate a regular practice of our own. There is no problem in taking an hour out each day to draw closer to God. And I would like to say here that even if you are intent on worldly success and achievement, then the abilities gained by cultivating God's grace via the process of prayer and drawing closer to Him will be very useful. So just try to take a few steps in that direction and see for yourself. And do consider adopting such a regular practice and check how you can incorporate those 8 aspects of yoga into different aspects of your daily life.
अपना सकते हैं।